Welcome back to Staff Meetings. A joy to meet with you each week. And today I want to talk about an important thing in your life, and that's the pastor and his pressures. Because only those of us who know the pastorate know the unique pressure that we feel in so many ways. Stress, for example. I talk to broken-hearted pastors almost every week. Pastors who, some have been the object of unnecessary, undue, and undeserved criticism or gossip. So many people are under such pressure in the pastorate today. Stress factor has risen so highly. A lot of our pastors are under such financial pressure and so many other things. I don't know of another profession that has to deal with stress and pressure as much as those of you who are serving in the local church out there in ministry today. You know, here at GuideStone, we have a health program. Do you know that the number 1 and the number 2 prescriptions every year that we prescribe through our healthcare program to pastors are both for stress-related issues? They're under a lot of pressure. And we know that because we know what kind of medications pastors use. And number 1 and number 2, as I mentioned, are all related to stress issues. Some say that there's a lot more stress when you're pastor of a larger church. And the larger your church gets, the more pressure you have, the more stress you have because there's more pressure to do. And I believe just the opposite. I've pastored small churches in little bitty towns in southwestern Oklahoma. I've pastored great churches in concrete canyons in some of the biggest metropolitan areas in America. And I got to tell you right now, there's a lot more pressure and a lot more stress on our pastors that are pastoring at the crossroads and pastoring in small churches in those kind of communities than there is on large church pastors. I mean, the large church pastor has somebody that does most all the counseling, somebody that does most all the hospital visitation, somebody that does this, that small church pastor that doesn't have a large staff, he's called upon to do everything. He's called upon to be everywhere. He's called upon to be all things to all people. He has so many pressures, so many stresses that come his way. And then primarily there's the deadline that only the pastor can know of, that sermon preparation that hangs over our heads like a cloud every week, to provide 2 or 3 more sermons. And now the added stress and pressure of all the television, all the internet, all the blogs, all the Twitter, all these very gifted orators and preachers that our people are watching and listening to podcasts all the time, and the pressure and the stress that comes on some pastors to think they've got to deliver the goods just like some of these other people do when they don't. You just have to be yourself. So much stress, so much pressure sometimes we put upon ourselves. Add to all this the fact that, well, I can tell you this because I'm out among you all the time, that so many of our pastors don't eat right. They don't exercise right. They don't get enough rest. And you combine that, all the pressures of the pastorate, with the fact that people are out there not eating nutritional food and too many fried foods and too many fast foods, and people aren't getting exercise. Let's be honest. Your average pastor is not exercising. He's living a sedentary lifestyle by and large, and he's definitely not getting enough rest. And you put all of those things in together, and you find that we're living with more stress today and more pressure than ever before. So I want to address that today, the pastor and his pressure. And there are several things I want to say about it, and I go a lot more into it in detail in the chapter on the pressures and the pastor here in the Pastor's Guide to Leading and Living, that you can check it out more later. But James had a lot to say about this in the first chapter of his book. First thing we need to know and remember is this: stress is predictable. James said, "Count it all joy when you fall into these various trials, pressures, stress-related issues." Not if, but when. Stress is predictable. Somebody comes along and says, well, what we've got to do is you got to avoid stress, just avoid stress. That's impossible because it happens. It's not if it comes. James said it is when it comes. Count it joy when it comes. So stress is predictable. I saw a bumper sticker years ago that said stress happens. And that's true. It does. It's predictable. So just realize that you're going to have stress. So it's not an issue of avoiding stress. It's there. And there's going to be there. But so stress is predictable. Secondly, I want to say this. Stress is problematic. Hypertension, blood pressure issues, gastric problems, all related to stress. As I mentioned earlier, that's what our number 1 and 2 prescriptions in our GuideStone program for health for pastors go to. Those that are dealing with hypertension, those that are dealing with blood pressure, those that are overweight because of stressful conditions, those that have gastric problems because they're under such tremendous pressure and stress. Stress is predictable. It's going to happen. You're not going to avoid it. So we need to learn to deal with it. It's problematic if you let it overtake you. Third, it's paradoxical. Listen to what James says in James 1:2. Consider it all joy when you fall into these various trials and stressful situations and these pressures that come. You know what? I think we ought to count it all joy when we avoid those things. But that's not what the Bible says. It says that stress is paradoxical, that we can count it joy when we fall into these various trials and circumstances and situations. Why? Because they perfect our faith. What did Job say in the midst of his tremendous stress? He said, He knows the way that I shall go. And when I'm tested, I'll come forth as gold. Stress is predictable. It happens. It's problematic if you allow it to be, but it's also paradoxical. You can count it joy. God knows the way that you're going. And when you've been tested, when you've been under stress, when you've been through the pressure, you continue to lean on Him and trust in Him, you'll come forth as gold. But you know, there's a fourth thing I want to say about it, and that's this. Stress is purposeful. There's a purpose. In fact, James says, beginning in chapter 1, verse 2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials, stressful situations of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. You know what? Stress can be purposeful in your life. It can purify you. You'll come forth as gold. It teaches us perseverance, as James said. It leads us to prayer. Stress is purposeful in life. And then there's one final thing I want to say about it. You can't avoid it. It's predictable. But finally, I want to also say it's profitable. Stress doesn't have to be your foe. It can be your friend. It's not going away. You're going to live with it. As long as you're in the pasture, you're going to have pressures. You're going to have stress. So allow it not to be problematic, but to be profitable. My great friend and mentor, George Sweeting, who was pastor of the great Moody Bible Institute for years, and before that, pastor of the Moody Church in Chicago. George Sweeting said that the Christian life is like a tea bag. It's not worth much until it gets into some hot water. And that's exactly the way it is with stress. It has a way of becoming purposeful for us and profitable for us in that very sense. In fact, in chapter 1, verse 12, James concludes that section by saying, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, under stress, under pressure. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love Him." You know, looking back over my life, I see those stressful situations, those pressures I thought were there. You know, the worries that come in the pasture. You know, the fact of the matter is, in 30 years of looking back over my life, and 40 years of looking back over my life in ministry, 85% of the things I worried about never happened. Never happened. And so looking back, I see that stress and pressure sometimes were profitable actually in my life. It's the reality of Romans 8:28. For we know that all things, stress, work together for good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Let stress be your friend and not your foe. And I want to encourage you to go to oshawkins.com where you are here going through these staff meetings, and go to the book section. We've got a lot of free downloads of books. And there's a book there called High Calling, High Anxiety that I wrote a few years ago that's all related to stress. It's a free download, this book. If you're under pressure, you're under stress, go get that free download. Read that book, and I pray it'll be Christ's hand extended to you to help you realize that stress is not going to be avoided. It's not going to go away. So it's all in how we deal with it, to allow it to be our friend and not our foe, to purify us, to teach us perseverance, to conform us more to the image of Christ. God bless you.